Alright, seventh graders, in Unit 10, we are talking about equivalent fractions, and then we are also going to talk about least common multiples. So Unit 10, Part 1 is about equivalent fractions. A pretty quick section, but can be a little bit tricky. So first off, a definition of equivalent fractions are two fractions that represent the same number. Two fractions that represent the same number. Another way to think about this is that if you put the fractions in simplest form, will be exactly the same. Which simplest form, if you don't remember what that is, we'll talk about in a second. So for our first exercises, it says to write two fractions that are equivalent to the given fraction. So to find an equivalent fraction, you need to either multiply or divide the numerator and the denominator by the same thing. So here's what I mean by that. So my first fraction is 5 over 10. If I say that I'm going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by 2, I'll get 10 over 20, which is then an equivalent fraction. I can also do this with division. So I know that 5 and 10 can both be divided by 5. So if I divide both by 5, I'll get 1/2. I could also multiply by 3, 4, 10, whatever. So when you're going to multiply to get an equivalent fraction, you can literally pick whatever number you want to multiply by, as long as you do it to both the numerator and the denominator. When you divide, you have to make sure that both numbers are divisible by the number that you pick. If you look at our next example, which is 7 over 16, 7 and 16 are relatively prime, meaning that the only number they have in common is 1, so I can't divide them by anything. Which means to write equivalent fractions, I'm going to have to multiply. So I usually start with 2 just because I think that's the easiest thing to do. And in this case, I get 14 over 32. Another easy one to do is to always multiply by 10. If I'm multiplying by 10, then I'm just adding a 0 onto each number. So that's really easy to multiply there. Number 3, I'll leave to you. 22 over 34, come up with 2 equivalent fractions for that. The second thing we're going to talk about is writing a fraction in simplest form. And I mentioned simplest form briefly at the beginning of the video. Simplest form means that the numerator and the denominator are relatively prime. Again, relatively prime meaning they only have 1 in common, the number 1 in common. Another way to think about this, which is probably how you thought about it before, is that you can't divide any further. You can't divide them down any further. So when we're writing fractions in simplest form, one way to do it is just to divide by something that you know both numbers can be divided by, and then just keep working down until you can't divide it any further. But what we're going to look at is a more mathematical way to do this. So we're going to start by doing the prime factorization for the numerator and the denominator, meaning we need to do a factor tree first. So for 21, I'll break that into 3 and 7. I can circle those because I can't go any further. For 24, I can break that into 3 and 8. 3 is prime, so I can circle that. 8, I'll split into 4 and 2. I can circle that too. 4's got to be split into 2 and 2. I can circle those. So I start with my factor tree. Then I'm going to write out all these multiples. So for 21, that means I'm doing 3 times 7. For 24, I'm doing 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And again, I just put those in order from least to greatest. After I've written them all out, now I want to circle what they have in common. So they both have a 3 in common, and that's it. So the greatest common factor of these numbers is 3. So that's what I want to divide by. So I have 21 over 24. I'm going to divide both of those by 3, and I'll get 7 over 8, which is then the simplest form. So this way takes a little bit longer maybe than just dividing until you get in simplest form, but you'll realize as the number gets harder, this will be a faster way to do it. Okay, so if you need to write any of this down, go ahead and pause the video. 7/8 is my actual answer. That's the simplest form. I'm going to go through number 2 with you as well. Again, I'm not to take up a lot of space for this. First thing to do is a factor tree for the numerator and the denominator. So 45 I can break into 9 and 5. 3's got to get broken into 3 and 3, so I can circle those. Also want to do a factor tree for 72. So I can break into 9 and 8. 9 gets broken into 3 and 3. 8 gets broken into 2 and 4. 4's got to get broken into 2 and 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and write out all those factors. So for 45, I have 3 times 3 times 5. For 72, I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. Now I'm going to circle what I have in common. So they have a 3 in common, and then they have a second 3 in common. So my greatest common factor is when I multiply those together. So that's going to give me the greatest common factor of 9. That means I can then take my original fraction, 45 over 72, divide both of those by 9. I'm running out of room. So that would give me 5 over 8 as my fraction in simplest form. Alright, if you have any questions on that, I want you to try number 3. If you have questions, just ask me during class. So the last concept we'll talk about before you get to your review questions is simplifying a variable expression. So now we have variables involved and exponents. We're going to do this the same way we did the problems before. We just have to take all these variables into account. So I'm going to start by doing a factor tree for 16 and a factor tree for 40, and I can worry about the variables in a second. So 60 will break into 10 and 6, and break that into 2 and 5, that into 2 and 3. I'm going to circle those because those are all prime. For 40, I can split that into 4 and 10, so that'll be 2 and 2. This will be 2 and 5. So I want to go ahead and write out all my factors of my numerator on the top, and my factors of the denominator on the bottom. So what I mean by that is I'm going to go ahead and write out as my numerator 2 times 2 times 3 times 5. So that's all my prime factors for 60. I also want to write out variables. So I have 3 x's and a y. I'm writing all of that as multiplication. So then on my denominator, I have 3 2's, a 5, and then I need to have my 2 x's, my 2 y. So to then put this in the simplest form, I can just cross out anything they have in common. These 2's go away, these 2's go away, these x's can go away, and then 1 y can go away. So my simplest form is just what I have left over. So on the top, I should also cross out these 2 5's. So on the top, I have a 3 and an x. On the bottom, I have a 2 and a 1. So that is the simplest form. I'm going to erase this, so go ahead and pause the video if you need to write this down. Now I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the second. So I'm going to start with factor trees for 49 and 72. 49 breaks into 7 and 7. Those are both prime. 72 breaks into 9 and 8. 9 breaks into 3 and 3. 8 breaks into 2 and 4. 4 will break into 2 and 2. Now, as you can see up here, 49 and 72 do not have any prime factors in common. None of these are in common. So what that means is when I'm putting this in simplest form, I don't even need to worry about the numbers. I know it's going to stay 49, it's going to stay 72. So on the top, I can write 49, and then I can have like 5 n's, and a p, all in my numerator, all written as multiplication. On the bottom, I'll have 72. I'll have 5 m's. I'll have 3 m's. And I'll have 4 p's. Run out of room. Okay, so my next step is to cross out what they have in common. They have all of these m's in common. So as you can see, the m's are all wiped away. They have 1 n, they have 1 p. So in the numerator, I just have a 49. In the denominator, I have 72. I have 2 n's, so I write that n squared, 3 p's, so I write that p to the third. As we move on to harder units, we'll talk about shortcuts to do problems like that. But for now, that's what we're going to do. If you flip over the back, There's two more examples for simplifying variable expressions. I want you to try those on your own, and then also make sure you do the review problems. The review problems, make sure you do them, and check them with the answer key. If you get stuck on anything, just let me know.